Narativ is funded by viewers like you. Support our independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Narrative Live. If timing is everything, then Craig Unger's new book could not have come at a more salient time. As a new president, Joe Biden, grapples with the wreckage left behind by the previous president, the former president just won't go away. Because of Trump, we are wrestling with a potential fascist insurgency, a failed coup, and a Republican Party terrified of what Trump's second impeachment trial it might reveal about them and their rank and file. So it's time to put one thing to rest about Donald Trump, shall we? Let's put to rest the question of whether he is, in fact, a Russian asset. And Craig Unger does it brilliantly in American Kompromat, his new book, where he provides the most detailed answer yet to the question, is Trump a Russian asset? And Craig is here. Hi, Craig. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm fine. Thank you. And thank you for having me.
It's exciting. Your book is really a good read. I'm going to wait to ask you the question of whether he is a Russian asset for just a few seconds. But most people know you for your very detailed research and your incredible writing. But and you always really do have the receipts when you're bringing claims about everything. But I've never seen an author actually bring something even better than receipts. And tonight you've brought something even better than receipts. You've brought one of your sources along with you. And this is former Major Yuri Shvets of the KGB, was of the KGB. Not of the KGB right now, who's one of your key sources. And welcome, Yuri. It's nice to have you on the show. You were the Washington, you worked at least Residencia, right? Is that what it was called in Washington for the KGB?
Yes, it was called Russian Residentura or KGB station in Washington, D.C. It's
quite a job, and it's certainly one where you could help answer this question of whether Trump is a Russian asset or not. And LB, how are you?
I'm good.
Let's start with Craig and talk about this book. Tell us what the three most important things are that people should expect to learn from your book.
Well, I think the biggest thing really is about Trump being a Russian asset. And, I think we've all heard hundreds of broadcasters saying, what does Russia have on Trump? Why is he kowtowing to everything Putin wants? And we've seen that the top intelligence officers in the nation, at least the pre-Trump ones, Republican and Democrat alike, from Dan Coats to John Brennan, have all said, Trump is a Russian asset, but no one ever goes further and explains what that means. And I wanted to do that and go back to the beginning. And more than a year ago, I met Yuri, and he was enormously helpful in that regard. So I was able to do that. The book also looks at the idea of kompromat as a theme going through this entire Trump Russia era. And of course, kompromat means compromising materials. And I believe the Russians have plenty on Donald Trump. And I also started to see the Epstein operation, the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell operation, which has been characterized as sex trafficking a lot. And it is horrible sex trafficking, but it was also a kompromat factory in which it captured the dirty little secrets of the richest and most powerful people in the world, men, really. Yeah. And finally, I write about William Barr, who has gracefully bowed out of the picture just as I finished my book. He was still in power when I finished it. But you see the rise of a right-wing authoritarian ideology in the court system. And I go into Opus Dei a bit, and which is a right-wing authoritarian Catholic prelature that had roots in Spanish fascism. And you see its rise in the American court system, which I think is very, very disturbing.
It's really fascinating watching you track Trump and then Epstein and Opus Dei and Barr. It's a really great read for those of us who are really interested in how those forces converge. Yuri, you worked with Bob Levinson for a period of time, and of course his death remains a real tragedy for everyone who thinks about those years where the CIA and others try to impact change on the Soviet Union. Tell me a little bit more about what you worked with him on, and I'd also like to hear about how you feel about what's going on with Putin today.
Actually, I met Bob Levinson in about 1998, just when he retired from many years of his work with the FBI. And he brought me into private business security, investigation business. And we were doing investigations for British and American corporation, hedge funds, banks in the former Soviet Union. Most of them were due diligence.
Right.
We'll
work to get Craig back on here.
Fascinating experience. But it lasted until his unfortunate disappearance, kidnapping, actually in 2008. And then I continued this business on my own.
You also went to school with Putin.
And as part, yes, I wasn't in the same class. We were at the same school, and as the Russian intelligence agency, current Russian intelligence agency, announced several years ago, we were at the same year with him. But he was a remarkable guy at the time, to the extent that I don't actually remember him. I have very vague remembrance of this guy because he had a couple of nicknames at the time, which can explain who he was at the time.
What were the nicknames?
One of them was
the nicknames.
Pale Moth, one of them, and Cigarette Butt. But cigarette butt, it does not reflect the Russian word, because Russian word is called akurak. This is the remaining part of the cigarette which is left over when you finish cigarette, and this nasty piece of remaining cigarette which you just throw away.
Right.
So it was akurak. This is how the people who knew him treated him at the time.
It's appropriate for what's happening to him right now, as he seems to be on his last legs there.
It looks like, yes, this is the final show, curtains, and it will be devastating for him. He is losing it. I have a feeling that he does not control his security agencies anymore, which he has been building for 20 years, which were the foundation of his reign in Russia. Now they're against him, and they're trying to remove him from power as soon as possible. So this is a Shakespearean story right now. It's a tragedy, real.
When you think about who might be taking over, do you think it's going to be Navalny, or do you think there's a possibility even that Navalny could be the next leader of that country? Or are we really talking about another iteration of the KGB, FSB continuum of those kinds of intelligence leaders?
I have a very gloomy feeling about the Russian future. I believe that Putin will be succeeded by people who might be much worse than he is. The top leadership of the FSB, led by Nikolai Patrushev, who is the chairman of National Security Council these days. And these people, they're actual terrorists. These are the people who blew up multi-apartment buildings in Russia in 1999 to bring Putin to power. These are the people who poisoned Alexander Litvinenko with polonium in London. These are the people who, a couple of years ago, poisoned Skripal in Great Britain. And I believe these are the people, it's not Putin, but these are exactly this team who poisoned Navalny just recently.
It's terrible. That we'll be watching that very carefully. Craig, are you able to hear us again? Your picture
yes,
a bit
I am.
Fuzzy. Okay, great. I'm glad you're back on.
I can hear you.
Okay. The picture's a little fuzzy, but we'll get through this, I think.
We can hear you well.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got some gremlins. Not unexpected.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you that question then that you answer so well in the book. Is Trump a Russian asset?
Absolutely. And I think in the book, I tried to go back to the beginning. And while we weren't able to answer every question, I started around 1980 after I started interviewing Yuri. And the first events took place just after Trump did his first very successful, that was actually genuinely successful the development of what is now the Hyatt Grand Hotel just next to Grand Central Station. And like all hotels, it needed television sets. And where did Donald Trump shop for his TV sets? Well, he ended up shopping from a company downtown, a Soviet electronics store run by some Russian immigrants. And these were people I wrote about in House of Trump, House of Putin a bit. And I even referred to this transaction, but I didn't really know what it meant. And after interviewing Yuri, I realized one of the co-owners was working for the KGB. And like
Right.
many Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union, he had made a deal with the KGB that they will let him out of the country, but he had to report to them once he got here. And he was known as a spotter agent. I may defer to Yuri after this, but that meant he was looking for potential recruits who could potentially be recruited by the KGB. And when he sold 200 TV sets to Donald Trump, presumably at a low price, that effectively opened the doors of the KGB to Donald Trump. And that was at least the beginning of a major part of their relationship.
So you're talking about Sam Kislin here, right? Is that right?
We are.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
Yuri can tell you a little more about him.
Right?
What?
Can you say the year again? The year again?
Well, 1980 was when the hotel opened. 1980.
So Donald Trump was buying 200 TVs from a guy who owned one of these Russian electronics stores and in the Flatiron. That really is how it all started?
It's certainly part of it. I mean, this sort of opened a door, and there was a lot of people forget about the Cold War. There were a lot of Soviet spies around, and there were many at the United Nations. There was, Yuri can tell you, one thing, I grew up, I'm old enough that one of my favorite movies growing up was Manchurian Candidate, which of course was this dark, conspiratorial, paranoid thriller about communists taking over the United States government. Well, this was not a grand, elaborate conspiracy like that. And Yuri can tell you better than I, but the Russians were approaching dozens and dozens of Americans, among them influential business people. And what we begin to see is a series of interrelated events going over 40 years or so, in which Donald Trump is gradually reeled in. And even though there's a lot of bumbling along the way, they hit the jackpot bigger than anyone could possibly have imagined.
Tell us more, Yuri, about Kislin and how that all worked out with the Joy Ludd Club.
Well, I worked at the time when this Joy Ludd Electronics was operational in New York. I was in Washington, so it was like developing before my eyes. It was a tricky store in a sense that it was the only store in America which was selling TV sets that could operate both in the United States and in Russia, because in Russia they have European PAL SICAM system, in the United States NTSC. And every Soviet working in the United States at the time, every Soviet high-level official, going all the way to the ministers, it was a kind of duty to go into the store and to buy this TV set, bring it to Moscow. And KGB was very concerned about this because the KGB knew electronic stores to be used by the FBI to try to recruit the Soviets. Actually, we had an accident in our Washington residency when an officer of our station exchanged a crate of Russian vodka bought at the embassy for electronic equipment in a local GC electronic store.
Yeah.
And FBI, it was illegal because vodka was sold only to the Soviet employees. It was tax-free,
Right.
and using it as an instrument of payment was illegal. The FBI approached the guy and recruited him. Then he was exposed by Aldrich Ames. When Aldrich Ames started working on the KGB, the guy was executed. So for KGB, it was a nightmare that FBI can use electronic store in New York to reach out, try to recruit Soviets, or to install a bug into this TV set. A minister or Kremlin official brings it home, and they're sitting and listening. That's exactly what the KGB was doing at the U.S. Embassy. I remember a situation when Soviet school children, like American Scouts, they presented from their heart to the U.S. ambassador at the time an emblem of bald eagle with a listening device built inside it. And this bald eagle was put on the wall behind the ambassador, and the KGB was sitting and for months listening what's going on there. So it was the worst nightmare for the KGB, and the way out was to recruit, to put this electronic store under control. It was not difficult because the owner of the store was well known to the KGB. If you remember, it was early 70s. It was Jackson-Vanik Amendment passed by the U.S. Congress, which conditioned granting status of most favorable nation to the Soviet Union if they allow immigration. It was mostly immigration of Jewish people out of the Soviet Union. The KGB used this opportunity. I have an absolutely reliable source who operated at the time in Odessa. They set a special squad for this purpose. Everybody who wanted to immigrate was approached by the KGB with a blackmail. Either you signed a handwritten note pledging to cooperate with the KGB, or you don't go anywhere. And I was told that about 90% of people who were approached signed the paper just to get out of the country.
So this is really important. Can we just underline that a little bit here? So all these, the Jews that were immigrating, or most of these Jews that were immigrating from the Soviet Union, were forced to sign this agreement with the KGB to cooperate. And that was part of the agreement which allowed the Soviet Union to have free trade, or to have trade with the United States, which was the Jackson-Vanik, I forgot the name wrong, amendment. So that's a significant thing. It probably explains why there are so many Jews in the Russian mafia, and probably so many, such tight connections between the Russian mafia and the intelligence services.
Yeah, exactly. So I was told that this particular guy, he signed the paper. But again, most of those Jews who signed the paper would immigrate and forget about it. But there was a small number of those who would leave this hell, the Soviet Union. And 3 days later, having landed in the United States, they would get back to the Soviet embassy, and suddenly they start loving the Russian government again, trying to do business. So those who, upon immigration, started developing relations with the Soviet government, it was a red flag, first sign that something is fishy with these guys. And these guys, they opened this electronic store, and the KGB had to be sure that they're reliable, that they're not double agents, that they're not reporting to the FBI. For this, they had to deliver information. And information they could have at this time was the so-called spotter information. They were looking for their connections among Americans and report to the KGB, like, we believe this guy can be interested to you. This guy, he may have interesting information, etc., etc. This is how they connected Donald Trump, and this is how they reported to the KGB New York station about Donald Trump. And these people, they were used for several years to gather as much information on him as possible. Later, it was analyzed, and the station came to the conclusion that it's time to put him in contact with the local field officer. And this is what happened.
I want that to be landed. Okay, so Yuri, would you mind, please, saying that again, that last part? So it came back to the KGB from the electronic store that this guy, and they had been watching him, and they had been tracking him, and there was a decision made this is a guy. Now we're going to go sort of full court press and convert him into a willing asset. Is that what you're saying? From the KGB side?
More or less, yes. There are different stages of so-called cultivation or development. First, you establish a contact. Then you spend time gathering as much information as you can through usually other agents. Then you put together this information in one single file. You sit down and you analyze it to see what are the prospects of this particular target. And then you make a decision. And the decision, I believe, was made by at least 83, that it's time to establish a direct contact with Donald Trump from somebody from Russian New York Residentura. This time to speed up and deepen cultivation of the target.
And who was that?
If I may interject just a bit here. At one point, I asked Yuri what Trump was like as a target for recruitment, and I think he can tell you his answer, that it was he was just the ideal target. Why don't you go and explain, Yuri?
Yes.
Yeah,
he was born to be recruited.
Women.
I mean, everything in this guy, everything is out of place, out of proportion. Everything is exaggerated, you know. It's like a combination of extremes, you know. Extreme vanity, extremely low IQ, extreme narcissism, and extreme
ego and
love to flattery, and obviously and greed. You have it all there.
So
you don't
easy
have
to get.
And one of the obvious things is the idea of putting a Trump Tower, a monument to capitalism, in Red Square in the middle of the Cold War when we were at each other's throats is just obscenely ridiculous. But Donald Trump is vain enough, he's narcissistic enough, not even to consider that.
And so who'd made that first contact in 1983 to take it to the next level? Who was the actual person?
Well, actually, we know, we established with Craig that one person we know was the daughter of then ambassador. First, he was the head of the Soviet mission at the United Nations, Yuri Shvets, and several months later, he became the Soviet ambassador to Washington, D.C. I strongly believe that she was a Russian intelligence officer. And it was it was really a hard time because in 86, the FBI uncovered a huge KGB spy network in the United States, which had been operational for 17 years and did incredible damage to national security. This is Walker's family spy ring. In response, the US government kicked out at least 95% of officers from Washington Station, New York Station, San Francisco Station. So there were a few people left. At that time, the station tasked this lady, Natalia Dubinina, to get in touch with Donald Trump. And it was she who arranged his first trip. Basically, I would say this, the KGB used her to bring Donald Trump to Moscow on this summer 87 trip.
This is them arriving in Red Square.
It was a different.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I believe it was a different officer who was meeting Donald Trump on more or less a regular basis. Under the modus operandi, this field officer was supposed to meet Trump for about once a month. Once a month.
And do we know who that is?
Once a month.
I can presume that it was Yuri Antipov, acting station chief, but I'm not sure. Or Natalia Dubinina was in her first marriage at the time, and her, as far as I understand, her husband was Alexander Yakovenko, who until recently was the Russian ambassador to London. the British journalists were looking around for years, trying to connect him with the KGB successor, because under him, the penetration of the KGB successor to Great Britain has been unprecedented. He was there, the ambassador, when Litvinenko was poisoned, when Skripals were poisoned, when the Russians helped to arrange this Brexit, etc. So, as far as I understand, he was her husband, and until he left New York, he was connected to this to Trump cultivation operation as well.
So we're talking between 1983 until recently, you'd imagine. He has had contact with assets, with agents of either the KGB or the FSB since 1983.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly. This is it's very important to make a point that the significance that KGB was the first Soviet-Russian organization which established contact with Donald Trump is very significant, because it means that all subsequent contacts between Donald Trump and Russians, or Soviets and then Russians, have been under the KGB or FSB SVR control. This is the modus operandi. No matter whether this is some greasy businessman or some lady who said that I'm a Russian lawyer, all those meetings could have taken place only with KGB, FSB, SVR, allowing this to happen.
And his election, would that be the same for his election?
Order.
Would the election have only been able to happen with the FSB approval?
This is again.
Wow.
Yes, exactly. It was their operation, Kremlin's operation. But they have a little bit different modus operandi compared to what we had in the Soviet Union. Now they're doing as a collective farm. Now the number one priority of any Russian intelligence or any Russian government big operation is to make as much money as possible. Because the agency put up a lot of money, millions of dollars.
To make as much money as possible, and also to move it into our markets.
No. The way they run intelligence operations these days, this Russian intelligence community would establish a group, and it would collect millions of dollars of operational money to achieve the objective. And then everybody involved wants to get some money from this pie, and everybody starts bringing his people into it. And instead, it breaks the essence of intelligence operation, because number one requirement of any intelligence operation is confidentiality or secrecy. But when they bring dozens, if not hundreds of people, because everybody wants to get money of it, and it becomes like a collective farm operation. And that's exactly what ruined this Russian meddling into 2016 presidential campaign. What they were doing, it was just sloppy, unprofessional, insane, and this is why they actually exposed Donald Trump.
Well, maybe the cigarette butt guy that was mediocre is not so great at what he's doing, Mr. Putin.
Well, right.
Maybe
that's exactly. By the way, this mediocre guy, he never worked in intelligence.
Craig, why don't you pick it up here a little bit and just contextualize what Yuri's saying?
Absolutely. I think it's worth pointing out that what Yuri is saying is very different from the official story that's out there. And just after Trump was elected in 2016, in fact, I think it was 9 hours and 30 minutes after he was elected, a story appeared in the Moscow Daily, MK. I'm sorry, I don't speak Russian, so I'm going to mispronounce everything. But it was an interview with Natalia Dubinina. And she gave a completely different story about how Trump was being cultivated. And she said her father was really the guy behind it, and he wooed and charmed Trump, and he spoke fluent English, and Trump was dazzled with him, and he told it was mutual flattery. He told Trump how he was just blown away by Trump Towers, and he wanted one in Moscow. And as Yuri pointed out to me, and it's obvious if you search old newspapers, that story is a complete lie. And one of the many reasons we know that it's a lie is simply that Ambassador Dubinin did not speak English. He could not have charmed Trump like that. And that was widely published because it was very unusual for the Soviet Union to appoint ambassadors to the UN and the United States who didn't even speak English.
So it was the daughter who did speak English, and he would have been more interested in the daughter, presumably.
An attractive young woman or an old, what's he known as? Molotov with a pompadour, I think Dubinin was known. He was very vain, supposedly.
And so the whole thing that started in 1980, you say 1980, but probably only officially started building up one-on-one contact in 1983. What were they doing all that time with Donald Trump? I mean, were they just grooming him? Were they teaching him the ways of how to become a fascist leader? What kind of training? What was he undergoing at the time between the 83 and onwards?
Well, one of the really interesting things that takes place during this period, and you have to remember Trump was, I guess he was in his early 40s. Around 87, he became friends with Jeffrey Epstein, and he was really very much a playboy. He had the persona of hitting all the clubs. He went through his wives rather quickly. And suddenly during that period, starting around 1984, he starts promoting himself as a foreign policy genius, as a man who's mastered nuclear arms and knows more about it. After all, his uncle was at MIT. And the truth is he didn't know anything about it. But as Yuri told me, nothing could have provided a bigger opening for the KGB than to boost his ego along those lines. So this is what was happening in the lead up to his first trip to Moscow, which took place in 1987. And as Yuri will tell you, that trip largely was, it had to be approved and initiated, in fact, by the KGB.
Is that the case, Yuri?
Yes, it was Natalia Dubinina, the officer of New York Station, who arranged what? She was used by the KGB headquarters in Moscow to invite Trump to come to Moscow. The entire trip was arranged through the KGB, by the KGB, and on the KGB's money, because official host of this trip was Russian interest, which was a front for the KGB.
This was a big coup, obviously, at the time.
This trip was... Yes, again, because as I explained, the Russian agents network in the United States had been almost completely wiped out by these expulsions, etc. So we had to start from ground zero almost. And in this situation, Arnold Hammer, who had been the Kremlin's agents for decades since Vladimir Lenin, 1917, was already old, frail, so they were looking for a replacement. And Donald Trump looked like a very promising candidate for the replacement. The purpose of this was to meet him, to do a charm offensive, to impress him, to flatter to the point that they feel he can be managed into the due direction, to hit him with active measures, sound bites, and develop relationship for next several years.
So it wasn't to install him as president.
The United States.
That wasn't the goal.
Had somebody tell them, no way, no. At that time, had somebody told that this guy someday would be the president of the United States, people would not even laugh because it wasn't even funny.
Right.
It wasn't even funny. I can tell you that the Russians did not believe that he has chances to become the president of the United States until about February or March 2016.
Oh wow, really?
And I believe this is where they finally make the decision that we may have a chance with this guy. And then they introduce into this operation Dmitry Simes, another long-term asset of the Kremlin in this country. And they arranged this Mayflower meeting where Trump was put together with Russian Ambassador Kislyak, and he pronounced his first foreign policy speech.
LB, do you want to jump in here?
There's so much in there. I wanted to hopefully have Craig talk about how the Robert Maxwell, his knowledge of, because I know that's in your book, Craig, and I want to bring things back to the book as well, and with the Kompromat, and really look at how, and have Yuri chime in of how at that time in the 80s, as I understand it, the KGB, someone like Donald Trump, is really powerful because he can get on television. He can say whatever he was saying. He was going on talking about NATO is ridiculous. We need to do with NATO. And he was almost, he could use his platform as an attack dog in the days before we had social media, right? This was a personality. And because of his Rolodex and because of Roy Cohn and because of the people around Donald, he had access into politics and into society, into banking. He had Ace Greenberg in his, back behind him. So it's not that they wanted a clown. It's that this guy, you get, as I understand it, you get Donald Trump and you're getting a power center from which to run your influence. And also, I mean, did he ever turn into someone who himself was collecting Kompromat? Was he a full-on? When do you become from an asset to an agent where you're actually running an operation yourself? So I'd love to hear these gentlemen, and then how Maxwell, as a frame, is someone who also, right, was flying in this world of intelligence. But he was a media guy, right? And media was so very, very important for everyone who had interest in Robert Maxwell in terms of intelligence services that he was working with and that were using him.
Right. Well, there's so many directions you can go with this. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, one, I think it's interesting that you see a tiny class of people. And when I talked to Yuri, he talked about Maxwell as a special unofficial contact. That's the same term he's used with Trump as well. And it meant he was trusted, he was reliable, they would trade favors. There were questions about how knowledgeable he was, and a full-on agent can be tasked to do specific operations and report to his handler. And and Trump's relationship was not like that. It was more, we're friends, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I also think Trump is really a mobster, essentially. And in that case, those cases, and Trump was very good at feigning ignorance. I mean, there's a legal term called willful ignorance or deliberate blindness. And we saw early on in the early 80s a Russian a Soviet emigre named David Bogatin comes in with $5 million and it says, I'll buy 5 condos. Well, Trump doesn't ask questions. He never asks questions. There's knowledge you don't want to have, and you certainly don't want to have it documented. And he worked that way all his life. He also worked with lawyers who would essentially go operational so that whatever was happening could be said to have happened under attorney-client privilege, and it was therefore not admissible in court. And a lot of that was going on. And in this context, Robert Maxwell, who was the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, was a fabulous, larger-than-life Falstaffian figure, I think, who predates Trump, of course. I guess he died in 1991. But you see, all these guys had their own yachts. One was bigger than another. Maxwell was very, very close to the KGB. He was close to MI6. He was close to Mossad. He had all sorts, and he would go from one intelligence agency to another, trading favors, always in his own interests.
And it's also interesting that Sorry, go ahead, finish. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that Maxwell and Trump are similar in two ways as well, that neither of them, they seem to have endless amounts of money to spend on various business ventures. And it seems like an endless pit of money. I mean, both men, certainly Maxwell died owing billions of dollars. Trump obviously owes a fortune. Who knows who owes a fortune? The similarities there too. Where did they get all this money? Is this money that came out of the intelligence agencies?
I think for Trump, some of it came from laundering money through his real estate, and we also, of course, around 2002, after he's gone bankrupt, belly up several times, 6 times, I think, in Atlantic City for overexpanding there. The Soviet emigres again come to his aid. There's a company named Bayrock, who was located in Trump Tower. They start partnering with Trump in ways that are ridiculously generous to Trump. They develop the buildings. They don't take a penny from Trump, and they just take his name. They really franchise it. They pay exorbitant fees, and they're in the same building with him. And these are all people. A lot of them worked way back with Sibico and Boris Bierstein, who were again tied to Soviet intelligence. And as the Soviet Union was failing, it was a way sort of for parts of the KGB to take enormous sums of money, invest them in the real world, and sort of hibernate to arise later, as they did, in this case, backing Donald Trump in 2002.
Yuri, all these businessmen that we see that are so successful with their billions of dollars and tied to Russia, did Russia bail them out along the way? Is Russia part of the reason they're so successful?
Well, almost all of them were fronts for the KGB, because the KGB modus operandi, it was developed in about 1989 when I was there, and the modus operandi was simple. We control the national resources. I pick up a guy, no matter is he a gangster or a former dealer of black market economy, it doesn't matter. The important thing is that he can be efficient and make more money. I give him access to national resources like oil, gas, copper, whatever. He sells this and he kicks back. So this system still exists under Putin. This is the essence of the KGB state business operation. And that's exactly what's happening after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I traced the major source of money which has been coming to Trump organization since about early 2000. It was either a big Russian state-run corporation which were under tight control of the Russian intelligence community or Kremlin. And second, different greasy billionaires, again used as a front in other KGB-related business operations, working for the KGB. So I'm positive that in the crowd which surrounded Trump, related to the former Soviet Union, most people, at least 90%, were this way or the other related to KGB successors. And they were operating with money this way or the other controlled by the KGB, or organized crime, which again was controlled by the KGB.
Wow. So the Trump organization was a front for the KGB or
it used
SRV,
it was
SVR, sorry.
Likes it, doesn't matter likes it or not, but the whole Trump organization was turned into a big money laundering machine for Russian intelligence community, this way or the other. They may, of course, pretend that they didn't know that, but this is a matter of fact. So when Donald Trump Jr. says that it was disproportional amount of Russian money in our Trump organization, should be added disproportionate money of Russian intelligence community operating in the Trump organization.
It's stunning when you say that out loud and you think that this man became the president of the United States. How did this happen without everyone's knowledge? Narrative is funded by viewers like you. Support our independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative.
That's the big question
Well, I
now.